Thank you all for coming out on a hot but getting rather cloudy day. This is Norman Scarpella. He is from Massachusetts. We won't hold that against him. So he may also be from Massachusetts. But a couple of years ago, I was looking for information regarding Bailey Island and the military there during World War II. And Norman happens to be part of a group that is interested in all of that. And so now I asked some questions of them and got some great information back, but Norman had never been here, so he's here on vacation, and he's graciously agreed to spend some of his vacation time talking to us a little bit about what he knows about the military in Casco Bay in general, and that will give you an idea of why the military at Bailey Island was important. They were the end of the line for defenses for Portland Harbor, but they were an important part, we feel, from being from Bailey Island. So thank you very much for coming.
Okay. So as Jerry said, my name is Norm Scarpella. I am a retired banker and a member of the Coast Defense Study Group, which is an organization that promotes the study of the seacoast fortifications of the United States and promotes their preservation. So we just get into go bother anybody that wants to tear one of these things down and try to get them to keep it. But today, a slightly different twist than what's on the sign outside. What I'm going to talk about is a brief history of the U.S. seacoast fortifications in general, with examples, and show some examples from each period for Casco Bay. And then I want to, this is a little bit techy, we're going to explain what fire control is, fire control of cannons, how to get the shell to hit what they want it to hit. And then at the end we'll talk about Bailey Island a little bit. So the history of U.S. seacoast fortifications. Everybody see okay? You can step back. I'm going to eventually sit because I've had 2 back operations and a knee operation, so not too good at just standing, but try it. Forts were built to protect important harbors and naval bases, which allows the Navy to go out and project force on the ocean and not protect the coastline. But the seacoast fortifications were never intended to protect the entire coastline. The forts protected the harbors. The building programs were tied to the congressional funding. 1794, 1808, and then 1824 to 1869 was pretty much some money continuously poured into the program. Then nothing for several years. In 1886 they decided, we got to do something, let's figure out what to do in an organized manner. That program lasted the 1920s when they completely ran out of money again, until just before World War II, starting in the mid-1930s, then they started building again. This is just a picture of one of the earliest ones that's still extant. It's Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia. It was built in 1798. It doesn't have any casemates where the guns fire through. The guns were on top of the walls. And it's an unmodified example of some of our earliest ones. Fort McHenry, Baltimore, is also of that same period. Obviously, the bombs bursting in air and the rocket's red glare. It protected Baltimore from the British in 1814. A little bit later, the second building program begin to get forts with casemates. This is a round one at Governor's Island, New York. Castle Williams built 1808 to 1811. Here in Portland, there was the 1808 fort was Fort Preble, and it's all gone. They had to tear it down to build the gun battery in 1904, but they saved this keystone from the arch of the gate and embedded it in the concrete. A little bit later, starting 1824, as I said, 1824 through the end of the Civil War, a huge building program, large forts, granite up north here, brick down south. Fort Adams in Newport, still there, you can get a tour. It's an excellent example with the casemates for the guns to fire through here. On this side, the channel is here, and they also had cannon on top of the walls. This Fort Adams is unusual for the U.S. Seacoast fortifications because it has extensive outworks. You can see to the right there, which mimics what they were doing in France and Britain during in that period, protecting it from from an enemy approaching on the land side. Battery Weed at Fort Wadsworth in Staten Island, New York, built 1847 to 1864. 3 tiers of casemated cannons, and you're looking at what's called the Narrows here, which is the entrance to New York Harbor. In this taking this photo, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge is just here, was just to my right, and Manhattan is up there in the distance. But you can see what they were trying to do, put and fire as many cannon as possible against a ship trying to go past. Another example from that period, this is Fort Jefferson, Dry Tortugas Key in Florida. In the South, as I said, they used more brick instead of granite. So there's millions of bricks in this thing. It's 60 miles west of Key West. So why would you put a fort, such a huge fort, so far, essentially out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico? The reason is it's the Dry Tortugas Keys form an anchorage, and they were thinking the enemy might be Britain, it might be France, and if they brought a fleet there and based the fleet in the anchorage there, the anchorage that protected them from heavy swells from the ocean, and they could control the Gulf of Mexico and the Florida Straits. So they designed this and built it. It was completed just before the Civil War and never fully armed or garrisoned. It was built to have 450 cannon and a 1,500-man garrison. What actually happened was that it became a prison for Confederate POWs and some of the political prisoners. Close to home, Fort Gorges. How do I pronounce it?
Gorges.
Gorges, okay. I always trip over that one. Casco Bay, right out, is the middle of Portland Harbor. It was built 1858 to 1864. They got it done fairly quickly. All granite, 2 tiers of casemates, and guns on top. It was the most important of that style of fortification for Portland. There were other forts, the older one at Fort Preble and Fort Scammell that I've never completely understood anyway, but that's another discussion sometime. But we found something, I just threw this in because we found this in the National Archives. This is a plan of Fort Gorges. This is an 1858 plan for a defense on the land, well, it's not land side, but the defense on the back side that never got built. It was gonna cost too much money and they just decided not to do it. So this is called a ravelin, and so this part, of course, is what actually did get built. The ravelin was going to be here, so if somebody got on the dock, then they had to go across a drawbridge here, through this gate, and over here, then across another drawbridge to get into the main fort. The type of cannon that you had, roughly 1780 to 1870, muzzle loading, smooth bore, cast iron. These are just some examples of the types of mountings that they would have used in the forts of the early to mid 1800s. We'll make sure we have plenty of time for questions at the end, and if you really say, wait a minute, you really want to see something close up, just give me a shout and we'll talk about it then. 1886,
what was going on in Portland Harbor during those years when they were building that fort?
which is a very important commercial harbor.
Was it the Navy's shipyard?
No, there wasn't a naval shipyard here, but it was very important. I think of lumber. I think they actually exported wheat from Canada through Portland. You know, at times the St. Lawrence Seaway wasn't, could be icebound. And the Canadian Railroad put lines down here to Portland to use it as a place to export to Europe. Commercial reasons, lumber, fish.
It was a railroad hub as well. After railroads became a thing, it was a railroad hub for distribution of a lot of products.
So, 1886, the President and Congress said, we need to do something. You know, what we had up through the Civil War wasn't going to be any good anymore, and we need something new. So they convened a board under the Secretary of War, Endicott, and figured out, okay, we need these sorts of things, these types of gun batteries, these types of cannon, and other things like mines and searchlights and so on. Forts were built at new locations, or new gun batteries were built into older forts. These gun batteries were typically, it was concrete gun batteries, fronted with dirt or sand, and the cannon were steel, breech loading, rifled cannon, usually in pairs, sometimes 3, sometimes 2, and then which these replaced the earlier muzzle loading cannon. These were often, they were disappearing cannon, and I'll show you what that was all about in a minute. And they also, important thing in the program in these years was controlled minefields. Now that's Fort Warren in Boston Harbor. You can see it's one of the old granite forts. It was built 1833 to 1861. But you have concrete gun batteries built here, over here, over here. And I want you to remember that spot right there, that concrete gun battery right there. This is that same spot. in Fort Warren about 1905. This is the soldiers are loading one of the new rifle breech loading cannon. This is the projectile here. These guys have a rammer. They're gonna ram that in. The powder bags are here on the cart. They'll put the powder bags in behind that, close the breech, and then when it's ready to fire, they trip the counterweights. Down below it here, there's some big lead counterweights. What that'll do is bring it up over the wall, like so. So that's what a disappearing cannon does.
In the previous picture, what was the guy doing on top of the barrel? He looked like
He's not on top of the barrel.
Oh,
Let's see, back up this way.
oh, he's off to the side.
He's off to the side. He has a sighting telescope. He's making sure that they're going to hit what they've been told to hit.
Okay, I thought he was on top of the barrel, and thought, well, when that moves, he's going for a ride.
And in this picture, I don't know why we don't still see him. Typically, that he'd stay up there to the side.
Yeah.
And that is the same cannon. I know, I've identified from those postcards exactly which one it was, and this granite wall is part of the old fort, and that's still there. In that period, they also had seacoast mortars. Again, breech loading steel cannon, but these were designed in pits of, they usually put 4 and 4, and a battery was 2 pits, so there'd be 8 of these. And they were designed to fire all at the same time to put sort of a shotgun effect down on an enemy ship. They didn't really, the Army didn't really use them much after 1920. And we got better ways of doing this. Portland Harbor, 1915 Army map. So, let's see if we can see things here. So, the main shipping channel is here. There's the old Fort Gorges. There's Fort Scammell here. Fort Preble here. And those are the older forts. Now, starting around 1900, they build Fort Williams at Portland Head. They build Fort Leavitt on Cushing Island. And the other big fort of that era, let's say 1950, is Fort McKinley. Got twisted on that. Fort McKinley on Great Diamond Island. You also have this other channel, which is called Hussey Sound, to get into Casco Bay. That's the main reason they put Fort McKinley where it is. It's an aerial photo of Fort McKinley about 1936. Each of these big forts was a small city by itself. They had, of course, the barracks and the housing and a hospital, the gun batteries, but their own power plant, their own water supply, and workshops for repairing things, and storehouses. The ones that are ashore on land are typically, they've got a rail line into them too. At Fort McKinley here, the gun batteries are out here. There's the mortar battery is there. There's a battery, another gun battery in here and in here. This is the parade ground, the barracks. Each of those huge brick buildings, Diamond Cove Associates owns the property now, and they have not only have built new houses, but they have restored some of the army houses and the barracks. Each of those huge brick buildings was designed for 109 men. 109 men was a Coast Artillery company. One Coast Artillery company was often one of the big gun batteries. So each of those, McKinley had, I think, 6 of those big barracks, each for 109 men.
So were there 6 guns on McKinley, or were they housed
Uh,
there but went to other islands
No.
to house other guns?
No, because the soldiers at McKinley probably also took care of the gun batteries over here at Fort Lyon, which is
Cow.
Cow Island, yeah. But otherwise, they were pretty much assigned there. The gun, if you remember the map, this is another 12-inch disappearing gun battery. It fires up to the north, towards the north end of Casco Bay. And the whole idea was that possibly an enemy warship was going to get into Casco Bay through one of the back channels, if you will, and they wanted to protect against that. And by World War II, that wasn't as important. So that gun battery probably wasn't in use then. Nice thing about Fort McKinley is this is one of the very few forts from about 1900 with the buildings are mostly preserved. A lot of these forts, these are huge pieces of real estate with a lot of buildings. It's like trying to maintain a college campus on a shoe street. So
I understood as well that a lot of those buildings still contain equipment, trucks,
I don't
other
remember the trucks in 1986. One of the warehouses was full of hospital beds. Another was full of the ancillary equipment for the fire control stations. They had these circular benches so the soldier could sit and move around on the bench looking through the telescope. I remember a keg of mule horseshoe nails. A lot of it got cleaned out by 2005, which was the next time I was back there. Fort Williams, 1936 photo, similar situation. You have the parade ground, barracks, the gun batteries are here, concrete gun batteries. This, as most of you know, this is Portland Head and Light here, so it's all that stuff behind there. But it was, again, a small city.
Missing out.
Yeah, I guess. Fort Williams during the 1920s and 30s was also the site for the National Guard units to drill in the summer, the Coast Artillery National Guard units, and that's what that large field is. They put them out there in tents for their 2 weeks. The regular troops who were assigned there, they got the barracks and the housing. Fort Leavitt, Cushing Island. The gun batteries are here. The parade ground housing is down in here. The Fort Leavitt was also, Cushing Island was shared with a resort called the Ottawa House. And the Ottawa House was there, it had burned down by 1931. I just remembered, I was visiting a friend out there, somebody who I knew that was showing me around the old Fort Leavitt, and I had lunch in, and his family had a cottage, one of the old cottages. The Ottawa House was not only the big hotel, but they had a whole string of cottages down behind it. And we were having lunch, and I looked at the plate and said OH on it. And it's just another example. If you once you put something out on an island up here in Maine, you never take it away. I'm going to jump back here again for a second. This is Battery Foot, which is a 1920s construction, two 12-inch guns. By that time, they realized they could take the 12-inch gun, and instead of putting it on a disappearing carriage that's going to come down like this, they could get better range if they could figure out how to do the fire control. And we're going to come to the fire control later. But they put them on carriage. By 1920, they figured out how to put them on carriage where the gun rotated up to as much as 45 degrees, by putting a hydraulic recoil mechanism, hydraulic and spring recoil mechanism, clustered around the back of the gun. That's what these were at Battery Foot. And I'm just going to show you that because we're going to come back to Battery Foot. Battery Foot's going to be important for Bailey Island later. During World War II, they covered each of those gun positions with a concrete canopy to protect it from aerial bombardment. World War II, seacoast fortifications. Long-range artillery to prevent the enemy from trying to bombard the harbor. The battleships of the World War II had 25-mile range, so you had to have guns now to counter that. Short-range artillery to prevent small enemy ships trying to enter the harbor. Fire control stations to provide aiming information. If you're going to fire 25 miles, you've got to be able to hit what you're aiming at. Controlled minefields, we mentioned those earlier. These are mines by controlled minefields. What I mean is the mine is put out in the ocean on the approach to, typically the approach to the harbor, and the Army would track where a ship was, and you'd fire with an electric switch. They'd fire the mine when the ship was over the mine. So the controlled minefield is not just the usual thing of, you see in some movies where there's this thing floating out there and it's got spikes on it, and anything that touches it, it blows up. These were controlled from the shore.
Were they mounted on the seabed, or were they?
Some were.
Or they were floating?
Some were, but the ones that floated up were up to a certain height, where it had a big anchor.
But some were mounted just on the bottom?
Yeah. Depending on the depth of the water, the speed of the speed of the water. There's some places like Puget Sound, they couldn't very effectively use them because it just was too much flow and too deep. Harbor entrance nets to stop the submarines. Now, the thing to remember is you're in the economic depression there in the 1930s. After World War I, there was this great demobilization. There were the Harbor Defense National Guard units that would drill with the existing artillery from 1900. But starting in 1932, the Army started planning for the next war. And what I'm talking about here is, and there's lots of kind of planning. I'm talking here about seacoast fortifications. So this is the planning for the seacoast fortifications. Starts in 1932. Most of the construction starts in 1942. And what happens through World War II is, and even early on in 1943, is the Army Corps of Engineers are building these things. They've had tons of money thrown at them to get this stuff built. They start building, but the threat decreases because the war, in effect, moves away from the coast of the United States. And as the threat decreases, the pieces of the construction are canceled. So, just for example, Portland Harbor was supposed to have two 16-inch gun batteries. One at Peaks Island, which did get built, and another at Cape Elizabeth that they never even started. Okay, so now as you leave, there'll be a test on this. I'm putting this up. This is called the location of elements for 1945 Harbor Defenses of Portland. What's important here is not what all these little squiggles and numbers mean. It's what it means is the importance is how extensive the system was. So, battery steel at Peaks Island is here. The fire control system for it extended from Fort Baldwin at the mouth of the Kennebec River here to Cape Porpoise down in Kennebunkport.
How many miles is that?
Oh, you would have to ask me. Point to point, you're talking,
I'd give it 25 miles.
25, so. My son always asks the hard questions that I'm not prepared to answer. Sorry. This is a photo of battery steel, Peaks Island, taken in 1945. 16-inch gun in the casemate.
What's a casemate?
A casemate is an enclosure for a cannon. So earlier it was simply a brick or granite structure that the cannon sat in with an embrasure to fire out to the ocean, to the shipping. World War II, they designed this type of casemated 16-inch gun battery where the gun was in a reinforced concrete enclosure with earth and dirt on top of it. So this, what it does is, if an enemy shell comes and hits the top, first of all, it's going to bury itself in the dirt before it hits the reinforced concrete. This is the primary armament for World War II. There's 16-inch breech-loading cannons with about 25-mile range. The reinforced concrete emplacement, there's two cannons 500 feet apart. Magazines and electrical generators are in between in the tunnel. This type of battery in the U.S. and other places where they were building these. 40 of these were planned, 22 were completed, and 18 were actually armed.
Battery steel still exists on Peaks Island. If you go to Peaks Island from Portland, you can walk through battery steel.
It's open.
Yeah, I haven't been there, but I've seen a couple of YouTube videos where there was a gentleman that took the video and he did a walkthrough on his own of battery steel, and I don't remember if he got to battery foot or not, but battery steel.
Foot's on Cushing Island.
Yeah, but he did a walkthrough, showed the inside of the batteries, where the ammunition rooms and that sort of thing. But you can still go and walk through that. It's open to the public.
Battery foot on Cushing Island is open, but you have to have permission to go to Cushing Island from the Cushing Island Homeowners Association.
Were any of these actually put to use in World War II?
The big batteries that were completed were tested. The question was couldn't hear was the word, where they actually fired in anger in World War II. The answer is no, some were completed. The guns were tested, and in most cases, then the large batteries were put in sort of caretaker status because they, as I said earlier, the war was moving away from the coast of the United States, and the troops were needed elsewhere. But the smaller batteries, the 6-inch batteries and the 90 millimeters we'll talk about in a few minutes, were typically at least had a crew available.
There is a rumor, I think, that the military tested some of the guns and they broke windows in houses 5 miles away. And I think that's incorrect.
No,
No?
it's true. It happened at Portsmouth.
Did it? Well, I'm not sure that it happened. I think they were firing half charges when they tested them. I believe I've read that. And that it was at South Portland or Fort Williams that there were houses close to the base that did have a little bit of damage, but
And those are the older guns at Fort Williams.
yeah, but it was a widespread thing throughout Casco Bay. Oh, every time they fire the guns, windows shatter, and I think they only did that once and said, nope, we're not doing that again. And I don't think it was as extensive as we now hear that it was, but
Well,
it wasn't
it
there.
happened all over. It may not have been at any individual port, any harbor. It may not have been. It probably wasn't as extensive as the stories have it, but it did happen across the harbor. There's one of my friends has found the damage reports in the National Archives, and it occurred at just about every one of these harbors where the guns were fired, and particularly when you get to World War II, where you've got these 16-inch guns, which just made a lot of concussion and noise, such as that. That's Fort Dearborn, Rye, New Hampshire, now Orleans Point State Park. That's Battery Seaman, and it's named after a person, S-C-A-M-A-N. 2 16-inch cannons, the same thing, magazine under concrete and earth. Plotting room is separate. In this photo, this is the number 1 gun. Battery commander station is this little thing right up here on top. And then the second gun is over here behind the trees. So this whole structure here is the concrete gun battery covered with earth. This one, a little bit unusual in that they had a road, they built a road up the top to get to the battery commander station.
Todd, if you're standing on the beach, how far out is the horizon?
Oh, really, if you're just standing there on the beach, you're probably 5 miles. It depends what you're, to the surface.
So 25 miles is like
Yeah.
way out
Right.
beyond the horizon.
Yeah.
Even if you're at a high point.
I think if you're at sea level, you can only see 13 miles before the earth curves
Yeah.
in, so that you can't make up. So anything beyond that at sea level would have been out of sight.
Another standard piece of the World War II armament was the 2 6-inch cannon with steel shields. This is, again, the typical gun battery. They're 6-inch guns. Some of them were the same gun barrels they had built in 1904 or so on a new carriage with this steel shield around them, open at the back, loaded by a gun crew in the open. The magazine is in the tunnel under here. The magazine, power generators, plotting room were all underground in between the 2 cannons. In this in this situation, this is the gun on one side and there'd be another one on the other side. One thing you notice here, it's interesting, see the tub there? That's a tub of water so they could sponge out the barrel after they fired it. Of this type of battery, we call the 200 series batteries, 89 were planned, 70 were completed, and about 60 were armed. We put these around a number of strange places. There were 2 of these on Bermuda. I think one of them was down in Trinidad. And we were helping the British protect some of their possessions. Third type of gun that was standard for World War II was the 90mm batteries, such as you had at the tip of Bailey Island. 90mm is about 3.5 inches. These were called anti-motor torpedo boat batteries, AMTB. They're two fixed guns, sometimes 2 mobile guns as well. The histories all say that the tip of Bailey Island had the 2 fixed and the 2 mobile ones. Maximum range was about 11 miles. Effective range was more like 5 miles. They were able to load them quickly. It was fixed ammunition with a projectile and powder casing all in one piece. Slap them in, and fire it as fast as they could. The 90mm gun was also theoretically capable of firing at aircraft. They could swing it. I don't know anything about whether they ever found that was a very effective thing to do. But there were, the same gun on different mounting was one of the standard anti-aircraft guns. Just a brief word about this. This is the 155mm GPF cannon. Because the stories I've seen, Jerry's seen, it says that 2 of these were placed down at the tip of Bailey Island between 1942 and 1943, and they were kept there until they finished the 90mm battery. This is a 6-inch gun. It's towed field artillery. We got them from the French. The French had developed this cannon before World War I, and when we participated in World War I, the U.S. didn't have an equivalent piece of field artillery. So we got some of those from the French. We liked them. We got the license to build more, and many of the Harbor Defense National Guard units in the 1920s and 30s had these guns, which they could then tow to wherever they were needed. Often these were paired with a great big tractor with treads, like tank treads. Maximum range of this was 9 to 12 miles.
Are these still, isn't that the caliber that the Ukrainians keep asking for?
Not sure. 6-inch.
Yeah.
It's a good size for a. Oh, the 155. Yeah,
Yes,
the 155 is a standard U.S. Field artillery.
These are still in use.
Yeah, it's not the same gun, but
Bigger or smaller than the 90? The 90 is a 90
3.5.
millimeter?
Yeah, 90mm
Okay.
is 3.5.
Okay.
The 155 is 6.1. What is fire control? So we'd be babbling about fire control. We need to understand what it is. Provides information for the artillery to hit a target. World War II long-range artillery were up to 25-mile range. The target is a ship that's moving. So the components of the system are the fire control stations, such as the towers down at the end of the island, the plotting rooms where they pulled all the information together, searchlights and radars, which augmented the fire control stations, and equally important, there were dedicated telephone cables connecting all the components. And we'll actually talk about those in a minute too. Just some examples of hundreds of fire control stations that were around the shore of the United States, Panama, Hawaii, and even Bermuda. So they're all different kinds. Some are round. Yours here at Bailey Island are square, but it's a tall concrete tower to get up high enough to see over the horizon.
I think there's one on Jules Island that's actually got a crenellated top. It kind of like looks like the top of a castle. And I read that was supposed to be to camouflage it as a summer cottage.
Well, they did camouflage them to some extent. So this is one that looks like a cottage. It's a fire control station, has two fire control stations there. Out in California, you often find them dug into the side of the hill. Down south, there are often concrete boxes on top, or even wooden boxes on top of a steel framework. There are two, one a little earlier from the 1920s and a little bit, one World War II at Trinity Point in Cape Elizabeth. And the older one, inside there's a steel wrapped concrete pillar for the instrument. With these, some of them were wood even, but the whole point is, let's say this building, the frame was wood for the barracks that were around it and so on. But the core of it was reinforced concrete. And the important thing was that and some of the earlier fire control stations from 1900, that's what you've got. You've got a concrete pillar that the instrument sat on top of, and then they built a wooden building around it.
Are there any towers in Portland or in Casco Bay that are anything but the square ones? Are there any round ones, or were they all built? I know there are different heights depending on elevation of the ground, but were there any round ones like that anywhere in Casco Bay that you know?
Yes, wait a minute, yes. At Two Lights State Park.
Okay.
The one that's back on the hill behind the gun battery, I think it's round.
Okay.
I'm just pulling that out of my memory. There seems to be no particular logic as to which ones were round and which ones were square. There is some logic as to, if you're going to do one that's dug into the side of the hill, the hill is giving you all the elevation you need. You'll find some are low and some are high intentionally. The one that doesn't apply to Casco Bay as much. But yes, you find different shapes.
What's the viewing distance? Does it vary, or do they always aim?
20 miles.
20 miles?
Yeah, 20 miles or so.
So how high above sea level do you have to be to get that?
The towers at Bailey Island are 8 stories high, and
Yeah.
I don't know what that puts the, one sits higher on a higher piece of ledge than the other, so they're different heights. But
So
did the
heights
pairs,
are 100 feet and so.
did the pair, so it took two
Yeah.
of these stations to triangulate.
Mhm.
Were the two, did they have to be the same height?
No.
No.
Zach,
We'll
just-
come
you
back to that.
mentioned instruments, so like, you're talking about kind of the telescope that surveyors use to sort of measure
Similar.
the angles.
Similar, we'll see a picture in a minute.
Look at theodolite that a surveyor would use, similar to.
Hang on, hold that thought. Just wanted to give you a picture of another one. This is Halibut Point, Rockport, Massachusetts. This is one of my favorite ones because I consulted with the state of Massachusetts to, in the restoration of this one. So it's a square concrete tower with a little bit of different shaping up here. Barracks, this is the original barracks that was built around the tower. And they restored it, rehabbed it, and have done a beautiful job. If you get down there sometime, it's well worth taking a look. Almost at an hour, and I'm still talking. Fire control station interior. This is a typical interior of one of those, of any of those stations, you know, either level at Bailey Island or anywhere else. You have 3 people, 3 soldiers, an observer, a reader, can't see him too well, he's behind this telescope. He has earphones and a microphone. He's got the telephone line to the plotting room. This is the spotter. The observer tracks the target with the telescope. The reader has the telephone. Plotting room may be miles away, and it rings an electric bell at intervals. They control from the plotting room. It varied from 15 to 30 seconds depending on the tactical situation, the gun battery they were supporting, or whatever. When the bell rang, the reader reads the bearing off the telescope. And the observer just keeps moving the telescope to track the target. The spotter is watching for the fall of shot and reports whether over, under, left, right, that sort of thing. Typical plotting room interior. The soldiers have the chart of the harbor. They know exactly where the fire control stations are. They're in telephone communication with them. And they plot the track of the ship. They know they calculate how long it'll take for the projectile from the gun to get to the ship. So they predict a position and they tell the gun when to fire so that the projectile gets there when the ship is in the same spot. Fire control diagram, this is just a little diagram I did. You're looking at a map of Cape Ann, Gloucester, Rockport, Massachusetts. I picked 2 fire control stations, Emerson Point and Eastern Point. Just an imaginary situation where an enemy ship is approaching Boston Harbor. The fire control station, each time the bell rings, they give the angle to the target. Plotting room knows exactly where Emerson Point and Eastern Point are, how far it is in between them. So with a baseline and 2 angles, you can tell where you can calculate the other point of the triangle. First time the bell rings, they give those 2 angles. Second time, those 2 angles. Third time, those 2 angles. And then the plotting room tells the gun battery when to fire so that its projectile will get to where the enemy ship is. Will be, where the enemy ship will be. Bailey Island. It's a photo from the Portland Public Library archives. You can see the two fire control towers there. The photo's is approximately 1960. This is from Jerry's Facebook page. Somebody put this nice photo on, taken from his boat offshore.
So
This-
that these two towers wouldn't be, you told us when we were out there the other day that those two towers wouldn't be supporting the same battery, like there were
No,
a whole bunch of different
yeah.
guns that those were
We'll
controlling.
come to that. This is a map that I had, shows, I'll call them the North Tower, South Tower, the approximate location of the 90mm battery was here, battery commander station there, and Jerry and I have come to the conclusion this map isn't all that accurate. We think the barracks and mess hall were in a slightly different position. He had a better map than I had, and I didn't have time to put it in the presentation. This is from another part of the Army documentation. So, and what I'm telling you here is the way the towers were built with specific gun batteries in mind, which were assigned when they were built. In other words, they weren't just built and they'd say, oh, what are we going to do with this tower? They built them so that each observing station was for a specific gun battery. The North Tower had the radar on top of it. The radar was to support battery steel at Peaks Island. There's 16-inch guns at Peaks Island. The second level below it was for battery cravens, which are 6-inch guns at Peaks Island. The South Tower was built, intended to be the top levels for battery foot at Fort Leavitt, Cushing Island. And the lower level was for the two 6-inch guns that were being built on Jewel Island.
And he may get to this or he may not, but there were another set of towers, probably at Cape Elizabeth, that were the other end of that aiming point. So there's two towers for battery steel, two for battery craven, two
More
for
than
foot.
More than that, Jerry. There were, I think, eight or nine for battery steel.
Oh,
So Fort Baldwin, Small Point, Bailey Island, and I forget what the intermediate ones were, but then all the way down to Cape Porpoise supported
okay.
battery steel.
Well, my point, I guess, was that Bailey Island wasn't the only tower. You know, a tower there was not the only one that was controlling those guns.
And then think back a minute to the fire control diagram I showed you. I showed you Emerson Point and Eastern Point, baseline between them. They would typically pair with the one next to it. They'd be assigned by the plotting room. Okay, I went on Emerson Point and Eastern Point to track this target, and they know that. They wouldn't be like, you know, this one and this one way over here. It'd be these two, and then, you know, these two, or they'd be in pairs with the one next to it.